So this video is really meant as an introduction to some foundational concepts that we're going to investigate more in depth later. We're going to talk about matter cycles and energy flow in this ecology unit, and we'll eventually be discussing these molecules and atoms more that I'm introducing here in the cells unit. And what I really just want to do is make sure we're clear about how matter and energy are related, and also how they're a little different for when we talk about how matter cycles and energy flow are different concepts. So let's just make sure we're clear on what matter is. Matter we could just kind of talk about as stuff, either gaseous stuff, liquid stuff, solid stuff. And maybe you remember from a middle school science class that really the foundation of matter are these elements called atoms that might combine together through chemical bonds to make molecules that maybe we can kind of observe ourselves. So all of what I'm showing here are different forms of water, either gaseous water, solid water, ice, or liquid water. And we know that really all three of those involve at the molecular level an oxygen atom, shown here, combined with two hydrogen atoms in chemical bonds. Those are what those dashes represent. And just maybe those water molecules are more clustered together in solid form. Maybe they're much more spread apart as a gas. And so that's probably what matter is. And for biology class, we're going to see that all of the different types of molecules that living organisms have that make up their bodies, that make up their cells, are going to be composed primarily of the atoms carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. Now there are some additional atoms, some additional vitamins and minerals maybe you've heard of that organisms need access to as well, that typically involve other elements, but we're going to focus on these six eventually in the cells unit. And we're going to see that maybe we want those access to those atoms because we want to combine some of these together to make up all the different molecules that make up our cells. So I just want to show this. Please don't feel like you need to write or sketch this out. I'm never going to make you memorize really complicated molecular structures, but just to show you that this would be like a very simple sugar with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms all combined in chemical bonds. So again, this is really hard for us to imagine, but we can't even see our cells, they're so small, but I'm asking you to imagine that that is an even smaller constituent part of a cell in my body. Okay, so we need access to matter to build up our bodies, and we also need energy. And energy can be kind of difficult to define. You're going to see that we try and unpack the concept of energy in a lot of different science courses. But for our purposes, energy is not stuff. It's not matter. It's stored in matter. And so you really need matter then for two different purposes. You need matter to build up your body in the first place. And you need other matter just to kind of store energy in chemical bonds so that you can release that energy to do chemical work in your body. So energy isn't stuff, but maybe it allows stuff, matter, to undergo changes that you need to happen inside your body to keep you alive. And so let me just think about the energy that's stored in calories in chemical bonds in this donut. Donuts have lots of sugar and fat, which are also ways that our own bodies store energy. So when you eat that, you're really incorporating those molecules into cells of your body. And what you can do then is, if we think about that sugar that I drew before, you can actually take apart the chemical bonds that are in that sugar, eventually turning that sugar into carbon dioxide, CO2. We're going to talk about this process much more later. This is kind of a very simple way to diagram cellular respiration. And the important part for us is, as you break up those chemical bonds, you're releasing a lot of energy that you can then use to power other processes. So I just want you to think of the energy is stored within the chemical bonds of that matter, of that sugar. And so again, let me get to this first. Why release energy in the first place? Why would you want to cut up that sugar into carbon dioxide? Well, you need energy. All organisms need energy for three basic processes: to grow, to make your bodies bigger, to build new cells, to build more of your body up, to build new molecules that make you up, to reproduce. If you're going to stay alive as a species in the long term, you have to be able to reproduce the next generation, and you have to stay alive long enough to do that. So we call that homeostasis, really in kind of a broad sense. We're going to be unpacking that term quite a bit later, but for right now you can think of homeostasis as like maintaining a balance. One very common example would be your body temperature. If you're sitting in a very cold classroom, then maybe you're shivering. So that's your body trying to make sure you don't get too cold by warming you up. Or you can also sweat and cool back down if your body temperature is too high. And all of that takes calories, takes energy. So organisms need both. You need matter to make up your body itself. You need stuff to make you up. And then some of that stuff is really just sitting there waiting, storing energy and chemical bonds for when you need to cut it up and release the energy needed to power all of the changes that you do, all the activity that you do. So let's just finish this video by talking about two really broad types of organisms and how they obtain their matter and energy differently. We're going to be talking about autotrophs. Maybe you've heard the term producers before, but I do want you to be familiar with autotroph as well. Let's break apart those root words. Auto means self. They are capable of generating their energy or calories themselves using very simple constituent parts. So they can kind of produce their own energy, although we'll kind of refine that definition a little bit later. And there are heterotrophs. They need their energy troph from others. They cannot simply produce it themselves. They're going to need to obtain it from others. You can kind of think of theirs being like two subgroups of heterotrophs. There are consumers who kind of eat living things generally, grasshoppers eating grass, snakes eating mice, for example, to obtain their matter and energy. And then there are decomposer heterotrophs who generally cut up dead things, but that those dead organisms are still made up of molecules that they can use for their energy and matter. Let me start with autotrophs because they're kind of more amazing in my opinion and more complicated. They're really going to build everything from scratch. They just get very simple materials from their environment and they're able to build up their bodies. So I think plants in some way are more impressive than us. Let's focus on the matter they need first. Remember that they need CHONSP, C-H-O-N-S-P. So they're actually going to get carbon and oxygen from carbon dioxide air floating around them. They're hoping to get the hydrogen from water coming in through their roots. And they're going to get all the other things they need also from the soil that's hopefully coming in along with the water. If you've ever looked at the back of a Miracle-Gro fertilizer package, you'll see that Miracle-Gro has a lot of nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus chemicals in it, what plants want to take in through the soil in order to build up their bodies. So they have the matter that they need to build up their bodies, but they also need a source of energy to convert all those simple chemicals into the more complex molecules that make up their body. They're going to get that energy from the sun. So they need energy from the sun, and they also need those simple atoms or molecules from all those different sources, and they can build up their bodies from scratch. Again, I think that's much more impressive than us heterotrophs, because how do we get our matter and our energy? We basically just steal it from organisms that already have made it. We just eat others, and so when we eat others, we get the CHONSP from the molecules that they already had. And we can also take some of that biomass that we're eating and break it up ourselves to release energy. So we don't really make, we have to repurpose the things we eat. So if you were to eat a hamburger or a spinach leaf or something like that, you'd be getting the molecules that make up those organisms, but you have to cut it up yourself first in order to make it human molecules. So you are doing a little bit with what you eat, but for the most part, you're just stealing it from somebody else. So we just tried to introduce the very broad concept of matter and energy that organisms need both of to make up their bodies and to power their activities. And we saw the relationship between them. And then we just tried to talk about two broad types of organisms, autotrophs and heterotrophs.